Trying to find space for art around the rest of your life can be difficult. If you work a full-time job, even a part-time job with a reasonably busy life, it can be quite hard to find time to work on the things that you want to. As we move further into adulthood, hobbies become increasingly sparse, and I would argue, increasingly important. So whether you work your tail off each week at your job, have young kids at home, or struggle to balance the busyness of a normal life, it is hard to find time for your art. However, like I alluded to a moment ago, it is very important to find time for art and hobbies. So in this episode, we are going to explore how to manage your art when life is, well, life. Welcome to the podcast. My name is Zach, and if this sort of thing sounds like your cup of tea, please consider subscribing. As we begin, let me know in the comments if you have any good strategies for working on art when life is super busy. I would love to hear them. So to start out, I better give a little bit of my background here for those of you who might be new to the channel. I was a teacher for 11 years in the American public schools. I taught art to middle and high school students during that time, and prior to that, I worked in landscaping and arbor work. It might seem ironic in some ways, but while working at the school, even though I taught art, it was incredibly difficult to find time to make anything other than demos for the students. For years, my art time was entirely based on teaching other people and helping students draw their perspective lines correctly, or add eyelashes to a portrait, perhaps. It was seldom, if ever, art for my own pleasure, and even when I managed to create a couple paintings each year, it always seemed to be a rush at the end of the year for Christmas presents for people, and that carried its own stress. It wasn't until I had taught for about 8 years and went to a conference with a load of other art teachers where I realized that there was another way to do this. In those conversations, I ran into a teacher who had stripped back everything he could in his day in order to simply provide more studio time for himself. Some of the other teachers balked at this, but as he spoke, it became apparent that his philosophy was, I am a better art teacher when I actually make art. I took this to heart. And as I went into that school year, I was determined to take more time to create for myself, hone my own skills, and actually, make art. I was optimistic at first, but it proved very difficult to stick to. I would finish work and be exhausted. The last thing I wanted to do was dive into something creative after working on things like that all day. The 50-plus hour weeks made weekends mostly recovery time, and I found again that I struggled to get more than half an hour of art each week. This continued over to summers as well. People often assume that teachers have this massive quantity of free time in the summers, and we do, but it's also time recovering from 50, 60, 70, in some case 80-hour work weeks. Though fortunately by the time I got out of my professional teaching career, I wasn't working 80-hour weeks anymore. In the early years, I was, as we were working on building a school. In the years prior to my educational career, I actually managed to get more time in for my artwork. And this was predominantly due to the fact that the exhaustion and stress that I was feeling was mostly physical, whereas the stress and exhaustion I had in my teaching career was also mental and emotional. And I found that when I was emotionally or mentally exhausted, it was much harder to work on something like art. But during those years, I would often come home and put some time into graphic design work. I even had the opportunity to design some logos and other things for local businesses, for a sports team at one point, and a good friend of mine and I even got to work for a card game at one point, which was lovely. Even though it was on a very small scale, it was a really cool introduction to things. So that's my background. Now, as we move forward through some of the strategies, I will likely unpack some of how they worked for me, or they worked for other people in my life. Or I'll talk to you about some of the things that I struggled with, because that's just real. I don't want to spend too much time talking about me though, so let's go ahead and move on to the strategies. First of all, carve out time wherever possible. So this can be either at your job, or it can be at your home when you're finished with your job. If you use public transportation, this might be utilizing that time as well. And if you are in a situation where you have to drive yourself to and from work every day, then the things that you listen to and you observe during those times can actually impact you in some significant way. But let's start with thinking about work. So while you're at your job, Do you have any kinds of breaks? Any kinds of time during the day where you can take a few minutes and you can sketch something? You can draw your lunch. You can look out the window for a few minutes and take some pastels and create an image of that sunrise or that sunset. It's important to try to carve out, at first, time wherever you can find it. Now, I worked in education, but I did have some breaks during the day. Sometimes I would go for walks and just kind of observe things, take photos of cool stuff that I saw. But sometimes I would lock myself in my office and just draw for 10 or 15 minutes. Go through the rest of that full pot of coffee that I was drinking every single day, which I would not recommend. That's not particularly good for you. When it comes to work, though, it's about trying to sneak in those couple minutes here and there. And a lot of the time with art, it's just a matter of getting in a few minutes whenever you can. Now, at home, if you have small kids like I do, a lot of the time that you get to capitalize on during the day is time that is revolving around what the kid is doing or is not doing. I used to have to capitalize really heavily on the times when my daughter was napping. I would try to get work done and find myself very, very frustrated while she was awake because obviously she's a little human being who needs my time and my attention, and she is deserving of those things. So when she would crash out for half an hour, 2 hours, I would try furiously to get some work done. And it was hard because in those moments I was often very exhausted and just wanted to rest or sleep. And sometimes I would. It's about taking care of yourself too and understanding what your needs are. But I also always had this understanding that that was the time that I could capitalize on to work on my art. And even if I was really, really tired and wanted to rest, I'd usually try to get just a couple minutes of something in. Nowadays, I often get a lot of my work in creatively after she's gone to bed at night. This does mean that I have to stay up a little bit later, but I'm fortunate in that I don't need a ton of sleep, so I'm able to do that. But the whole point here is to try to shove in some time, reclaim some time wherever you can find it. Most of our lives have these little snippets of time. I fill a lot of this extra time with video games, and a lot of people simply scroll through social media. So think through what you do with that kind of downtime. I understand that for a lot of us, art is stressful, and so it can be hard at the end of a really long, stressful day to try to shove in something else that is going to be additionally stressful. But if you are like so many artists where the art itself is relaxing, then I would encourage you to choose that over things like video games, watching TV or Netflix. Or if you can stack them and do them at the same time, then more power to you. But you will probably feel better about what has been accomplished if you've managed to get some art done, rather than just simply watch another episode of that anime that you've seen 16 times. At least that's how I watch most things. I just watch the same things over and over again because it's comforting. Another little strategy here before moving on to the next section is that you can think about this in terms of rewarding yourself. I will often try to give myself a couple minutes of playing a video game after I've recorded a video, after I've drawn for half an hour or something. So I'll take kind of that thing that I want, the treat, as it were, and I'll try to force myself into a situation where it's like, okay, I can do that, but like after I work out, or after I clean the kitchen, or fold the laundry, or take care of this video, or write this script. And it works pretty well for me. If you're a person who has that kind of self-control, perhaps look into rewarding yourself with those fun little things after you've managed to do something more productive, something artistic. The next strategy is to dedicate specific time throughout the day to focus on the distinct details of things. That sounds really complicated, so let's break it down for a second. Our lives are busy, and we are not going to be able to simply dump important things in order to make art all the time. It would be lovely if we could just go, I'm going to take this time that I would normally pay bills or, take out the trash, and instead I'm going to draw, but it's not quite how life works. So try doing this. Try taking the normal tasks that you have to do as part of your life or part of your work, and instead of just glossing over all of the things that you are seeing, start trying to look at those things with artistic eyes. Take the opportunity to add to your visual library. Well, what do I mean by this? As you're going through your day, try to break down the objects that you see. When you drive by a tree that you find particularly interesting, don't just look at it as a tree, but try to think about, If I was going to sit down right now and draw that or paint that, how would I do that? What colors might I mix to get there? What shapes am I seeing in that? When you look at a person's face and you can stare at them without things being terribly awkward, try to break down what's happening with the light on their face. This might sound a little strange, but Mark Burnett actually talks about this a lot in his videos, in his classes, and things like that, and I think it's a really smart thing to do. In fact, in my life, when I have been massively immersed in art, where my brain is just chewing on artistic things all the time, I find myself accidentally noticing facets like this, accidentally noticing how the world around me is put together. And it seems to me that this is something that we can actively do as well. So even if you can't steal a couple minutes at work to actually make some art, try thinking about the things that you're seeing in an artistic way. Try to basically work through how you might illustrate that thing when you get home tonight. This is kind of a similar thing for writers. If you are writing a story, you can't necessarily be writing all the time, but you can be chewing on the ideas and concepts in the back of your mind while you're doing other things. While you're driving, you can be thinking about the dialogue that those characters are going to have to deal with. You can't necessarily think exactly about how you're going to draw a thing, but you can break things down and try to understand them. I will forcibly do this sometimes when I'm driving, especially if it's a long drive. I'll try to think about why the mountains look the way they do. I'll try to forcibly notice atmospheric perspective, how the mountains that are further away from me seem lighter. They seem like the yellows and greens have been stripped away. When I notice those things and remind myself of those things and chew on those things as an artist, they are then things that come up much more readily and easily accessible in my art making process. And so this is a great strategy to think about, to rewire your brain for if finding artistic time during the day is incredibly difficult. Maybe you can't do any art until you get home, or it's only a couple times a week that you can do it. Well, if you can train your brain to be thinking artistically more of the time than it's not, then you're going to lose less traction. And it's going to be far easier to engage in that art when you do finally have the time. This one might seem a little bit trite, but try to use your work time wisely. Can you go on a walk for lunch? Go on a walk and observe the world around you. Take things in and focus on them. If you have breaks and the temptation is to sit there and just scroll on Instagram for a few minutes, are you actually able to sit down and get a 5-minute drawing done? Now, in those kinds of moments, it might be something that you feel a little bit awkward. I've certainly run into this before where all of my colleagues are sitting at a communal place for lunch, and it would be really strange if I just started drawing in the middle of that room. But you know what? The couple times that I have, nobody asks any questions. And every once in a while, somebody will come up and they'll say something. And if they say something that's condescending or a little bit unkind or even just inquisitive and you don't want to deal with it, just answer it in a snarky or funny way. Or, tell them you're doing something you're not. You're obviously sitting there drawing your apple for lunch and oh, what are you making? You're like, oh, I'm trying to draw a self-portrait. And just diffuse it by being weird and awkward. People always expect us to be kind of strange anyway. So, playing into the stereotype isn't such a bad thing. But this was a huge thing for me professionally when I was able to carve out just 5, 10, 15 minutes a day during a break in between classes right before I left to drive home. This was one that I found is often by the time I got home, I wanted to just not do anything productive because I was so tired and so bent out of shape with work. So I actually had a couple times where I scheduled classes that started about an hour after my workday or right after my workday. And so I would just stay at work. I had these blocks of time where, well, I guess I can't do anything. I don't have any video games to play here. I didn't bring a book. I'm not going to watch, Netflix or YouTube. So I guess I'm just going to sit here and draw for a little while. That's a really smart thing to do if you have the capacity to do that. But also just if you finish your workday and you have a 20, 30-minute drive home and you don't have to rush to get home, just give yourself 5 to 15 minutes to wind down and get a few minutes in of drawing practice on something. Often I find that this shifts my mood in a really positive way. And this was a hard thing for me to do. I often got to the end of my workday and would sit there and be like, I deserve to just kind of goof off for the rest of the day. And that might be true. But because I have this desire to grow, to improve, and continue working on my artwork, when I get to the weekend and I'm exhausted, and I finally have some time to do something, and I find that I feel bad because I haven't put any time into my art, and then when I finally pick up a pencil, it feels like my skills have eroded away. That's a really saddening moment. So I find that if you can use your time at work wisely, and that wisely can be like not wasting time, but it can also be taking a couple minutes before you drive home to focus on something. That is a really advantageous thing. It stops some of the like backsliding, some of the lack of progress or loss of progress that you might have over a long time of working a professional career and still trying to hone your artistic skills. Here's another one that ties in with this just a little bit. Try to keep work and hobby time separate as best as you can. If you work from home, this is much harder to do. But if you work outside of the house, somewhere where you can drive or walk to, it can be an easier prospect. So let's chew on that one first. If you work outside of the home and you are able to leave work at work when you come home, maybe if you have a partner or a spouse that you need to talk to about your day when you get home, try to do that right away and then just leave that somewhere else. I find for myself that either working out or showering or a combination of the two, even going for a walk, those are things that allow me to like reset my day. If you don't have something that allows you to reset your day, reset how you're thinking about things and looking at things, I would highly recommend finding one. For me, often it is just a shower. I took one today, even though I hadn't worked out. I wasn't necessarily really dirty, but I had an exhausting morning. I spent some time at the gallery. It was a lot of time dealing with kind of moving things around. I didn't get much time to work on my artwork like I like. I came home and I felt super tired. And so I took a shower. And the shower to me feels like a soft reset on my day. It allows me to separate my work from my home stuff. In my case, from this part of my work stuff, making videos and recording and artwork, and my time at the gallery and taking care of my daughter this morning. So I would highly encourage you to find some things like that, though, that create these hard separations between your work and your personal life and your hobby time. Because I find once you have done that, once you have created a separation, it's much easier to dive into your hobbies. And these strategies can work really well whether you work from home or outside of the home. If you work from home, there are some other things that are going to kind of change how this looks too. So not only is something like working out or the shower beneficial, but even just like changing your clothes. If you work from home, I think it's a really good idea to dress as if you were going out and working. So if you're dressing semi-professionally at home, then when you're done with your workday, it might be a really good idea for you to get up from wherever you work, go to your room, change your clothes so you feel like something significantly has changed in your reality in that moment. Get a snack, go for a walk, do something, but create some breaks between your personal life and your hobby life. And if you have the ability, I would make sure that those two spaces are separate. The space that I work on my art is generally the space that I also work on all my video editing and stuff. And that's not a great thing. I just don't have the space to spread out. But it's also the reason why I work upstairs on the dining room table a lot of the time for my drawings. I can't record up there, which is kind of a bummer. But to be fair, recording my artwork often feels like work. I'm always more conscious of the fact that other people are going to look at the stuff that I'm making. And I probably only do about 30 to 35% of my artwork while I'm recording it. If you are not like me, if you are just a normal person who is making art either for hobby or for the goal of going professional at some point, you probably don't need to record all of your work. So if you can find a space that is different than the space that you work in, if you can find a different computer to use, if you can not work on a computer, if you work from home and use the computer all the time, I would highly encourage you to do those kinds of things. Create separation from your professional work and your personal work, and they will start to feel separate. Your brain will start to interpret them differently and probably will start to look at your personal work and your hobby work as a much more enjoyable thing, something that is stress relieving rather than something that is stress inducing. If you find that art is stressful for you to engage in, or even just sometimes stressful, try to only engage in the lowest stress art at first. Start with doodles and copying, start with abstract or non-representational art, and fall back in love with simply making marks on the page or the canvas. Get yourself some Play-Doh or some oven-baked clay. Just do something that is enjoyable. I find for me that I often have pretty high expectations of my artwork, And while I enjoy the process, sometimes I'm working on getting to the point where I enjoy it most of the time. However, a lot of my friends and my family who are artists, and a lot of my students who are artists over the years, they really enjoyed the whole process. It was a stress relieving thing for them. If that's you, then a lot of what I'm talking about in this little section is probably not going to be such a big deal. But if you are like me, where art is also stressful, then I would purposefully try to abstain from doing the stressful art until you are feeling like you're in a better spot with things. For me, this has just meant that I work on the same kind of things frequently, and I allow myself to do goofy little robots and vegetable critters and drawings like that, because it means that there's always a form of art for me to engage in that is low stress. And that just makes my life better. It makes it easier to engage in all of the aspects of the process. The next category here is to dedicate specific time throughout the week and to start small as it pertains to this. I am a big believer in habits, in the fact that we as human beings tend to work better if we establish a routine. The most recent example I have of this is my writing. I write a little bit every single day. I have a certain word count that I try to hit, and I usually have my text just open on my computer at any point in time so I can dive into it. This is something that I worked to build over the course of a couple months in 2023. I started in August, September, and I kind of solidified it by October of that year. And this has been really fundamental to my writing progress, because I know that pretty much I take care of getting my daughter to bed, I spend some time with my wife, I clean up a little bit, and then usually from about 9 to 10 or 10 to 11 o'clock at night, that is the time that I have dedicated to writing. My goal is to get 1,000 words, and I usually have my stuff outlined ahead of time, so it's not like super stressful when I dive into it. Like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? I usually have some idea, and I try, if I'm smart during the day, to think a little bit ahead about what I'm going to do. That habit took a little while to figure out, maybe about 30 to 60 days of tinkering with it and slowly increasing the amount that I was writing a day. At first, it was just I need to write a little bit every day, and so some days it would just be a couple sentences. And then it went to about 700 words, and then I upgraded it to 1,000. And 1,000 is my daily goal now. I don't always hit it, but I almost always hit it. My average for what I'm working on right now is about 890. My average for the last novel that I worked on the first draft for, I think, was 1,200. So I've had a lot of sick days recently. I'm slowly working on getting that average back up to 1,000, but I try not to let it bother me too much. It does bother me a little bit, though. But that habit has made writing easier. Like, writing just happens now because it's something that I've inbuilt. So if you are struggling to find time for your artwork, or struggling just to take time to put into your artwork because of your busy life in whatever aspect that is, I would encourage you to start by building a habit and dedicate specific time over the week or on a daily basis to spending time making art. So if you have nothing right now, like your desire is just to start making art again, I would try to figure out the strategy that you use for scheduling most things in your life, whether that's putting it on the calendar, putting it on your phone, putting it on the calendar app on your phone, whatever strategy you use, I would employ that here as well. For me, I generally keep a calendar for my week on the days that I'm supposed to do things. So if I was trying to do this, I would go, okay, Saturday, usually I've got some free time, between about 9 o'clock in the morning and 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I would just go, I'm going to put some drawing time in at the beginning of that block. And maybe my goal originally, if I wasn't doing anything, would just be half an hour. Just try to schedule half an hour a week. Now, after a couple weeks of doing that, I think it would be really reasonable to up that, to start going, okay, well, let's try to do one evening a week as well. Let's try to get in 2 times a week. And I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. Wherever you are now, if you want to get more art time in, start scheduling out specific times for that. And then don't overburden yourself. Not only am I a person who's a big believer in habits, but I'm a big believer in not holding yourself accountable for too much too early. It's really easy to sit there and go, oh my goodness, I need to get back into art. I need to start doing an hour of art a day. You might be able to do that for a week or so, and then you're going to burn yourself out and you're not going to be getting anything done for a long period of time, and that's awful. So try to be careful when you restart this process. Give yourself small, attainable goals and portions of time that you can get done. but I am a huge believer in the fact that scheduling that time will have the biggest impact, will be the most beneficial to you. So try to just dedicate what you can at first. If you get up before other people you live with, dedicate a few minutes there. If you're the last person to go to bed like I am, try to dedicate some time there, assuming your brain isn't done for the day by the time that happens. Find where you have some time and just slowly start carving out pieces of it. If you find that you wind down at the end of the day by watching YouTube videos, watching comedy, watching Netflix, playing some video games, just try to carve out a little bit of that time and use that for your art. And you will be surprised if you marry yourself to that goal of slowly increasing that amount of time. All of a sudden, a half an hour a week becomes an hour a week, becomes 2 hours a week, becomes 5 hours a week. And then all of a sudden you have sketchbooks that are getting finished, pieces that are getting finished, the ability to work on commissions for other people, the things that you want to do, right? So start small, but try to dedicate specific time on a daily or weekly basis. On that exact same train of thought, hold yourself accountable for just putting pencil to paper each day. So this would be the elevated place beyond what we just talked about. And this is what I try to do. And I haven't been good about it lately. We've had a lot of sickness in the family. Maybe excuses don't matter, but I feel like it's reasonable to tell you these things and to say these things, because it's very easy for somebody on the internet to give advice and the assumption to be like, oh, well, they must adhere to all their advice. No, I try to, and I do pretty good with it most of the time, but I am not perfect by any means. I know what I need to do, but sometimes I just need to sleep, but I try not to spend too much time away from it, because that's really where the detriment comes. So this is the next stage. Even if you can only get 5 minutes in a day, start with that and build the habit of doing it whenever you can, even if you're tired or busy. This is something that generally I'm capable of doing. I can get 5 minutes of drawing in every day. That's not hard. I'll probably forget to, because at that point it's such a small, insignificant thing. But I've started doing just little drawings on sticky notes that I do with my kids sometimes. That's fine. But just touching a pencil, or in my case, often a pen, to paper every single day is super important. I've heard of a lot of people doing things along these lines, starting with just a couple minutes a day, or just agreeing with themselves that their goal is to draw every day, even if it's only for a minute. And the reality is, when you sit down, generally, you don't just draw for a minute, you draw for a couple minutes. Now, sometimes it is only 10. I sit down to put one of my robots together, and I draw a really simple, cute little robot, and he's funny, and that was a 10-minute drawing. It's great. That's another day that I can stamp off. I got this. And on that note, if you do really well with checkboxes and stickers and stuff, when you were a kid, if you loved doing those things, get a calendar for yourself, a cheap calendar, and just put an X on each day that you managed to draw. If that's going to be something that's going to add to your experience and be a good thing for you, I would highly encourage you to do it. I've done that before, and I find it really rewarding when it's oh, it's 20 days in a row that I've managed to draw. This is fantastic. It's easy to continue drawing once you start. It's often hard to start, and it's hard because we have all these expectations, among other things. But if your expectation is just time, that you're just going to sit down and spend some time drawing, it's a lot easier to do that. And it's also a lot easier to do on the 100th day than it is to do on the 3rd day. So give yourself some grace, and just, if it's important to you, try to commit to doing just a teeny bit every single day. While you're at work or just living in your busyness, try to find the humor in things. So this is something that is common in a lot of the comics that we see, or that I used to see growing up in the newspaper, is a lot of them were about work environments or raising kids or things like that. I'm thinking of Dilbert at this exact moment. There was also the comic Zitz and Foxtrot. A lot of those were just parents observing things, or people in corporate environments observing things. So keep your eyes out for the goofy or really frustrating things that happen at work, and try sketching those into little comics, into memes, into little things like the Far Side comics, right? Where just single panel drawings. A lot of those kind of drawings are not great. They're not high art in any fashion, but they're humorous and they're entertaining to people. And so if there are things at work that happen that are crazy or stressful or funny, try to document those in artistic form, and do it quickly, in the moment, on a sticky note, on your tablet, whatever it might be, and then you can refine that later. This is kind of a weird strategy, but it's something that you can look for in your day. And again, if you use your time at work really wisely, where you're thinking about this frustrating email that you just got, and you're like, well, can I make something entertaining out of that? That'll not only like get some art done, but it will dissipate some of the frustration that you had with that original thing, the artifact that was making you frustrated in that moment. So try to shift things, shift your perspective a little bit, and think about those things in a way that's going to allow you to come out of it with a benefit and maybe some art as well. Avoid putting significant pressure and expectations on your art if you have a very limited amount of time as well. We're coming down to the end here, and this is something that I think is really important. We've talked for a while about some strategies that may or may not work for you in your particularly busy life. But the reality is, if you are listening to this, if you're identifying with this, that it's probably already a pretty hard situation. So be kind to yourself. Understand that this season just might be a really difficult one for you artistically. And maybe trying to get any real progress moving forward is not the greatest goal that you could have. Maybe the best goal that you could have is just to keep your skills from decaying. And that might shift how you think about things. It might shift from, I want to get, 2 paintings done a week to just, I'm going to try to get a painting or 2 done a month. And I'm just going to try to focus on the things that I enjoy or the skills that I worked hard to develop so they don't fall away. This is something that is a hard realization, but if you are identifying with this, there's a good chance that your life is a lot right now. And perhaps this is not the season for artistic growth. Maybe this is just the season to make some art because you enjoy it and not to lose the skills that you've developed over the years. And I think one of the best things you can do here is be honest with yourself. Wrap your head around the reality of your situation. Are you going to be able to continue working on art the way you want to, or do you need to give yourself some grace? Do you need to have rational expectations? Do you need to pull back some of the pressures that you're putting on yourself so that you can just survive in this moment? And maybe work towards some of the things that I talked about earlier, some of the things that are important, some of the things that need to happen at some point down the road, but maybe don't need to happen today. Well, as always, thank you for your time. I know this is kind of a difficult topic, and I'm trying to give you my perspective and the things that I've struggled with and some ways that I've handled it, but this is a really broad topic, and I obviously haven't handled all of the pieces here. So I would really appreciate hearing from you in the comments below about anything that I've talked about here. If you have additional things, that would be lovely. If you heard some of the things I said and they are just not going to work for you, I would also like to hear about that too, because it's more for me to chew on and think about and see how I might be of service to you who are listening. We have a Discord community attached to this channel, and if you'd like to check that out below, there's a link to it in the description. It's just a small community where we support each other and talk about our artwork and just are building some lovely friendships, which is wonderful as you're trying to work through your busy life artistically. Thank you to patrons Who, What, Where, When and Pale Spider for your continued support. I very much appreciate it. We have a Patreon associated with this channel as well, and if you would like to join there to help me out, it would be fantastic. You get access to some little inside peeks, outlines and scripts ahead of time in some capacities, and even the ability to dictate the direction that I go with my content here on the channel. Have a good one, y'all. See you soon.